Hey, hello. We're back. Everybody's
Yeah,
This is a ton of fun. We're back. I'm going to rearrange some videos really quickly so that things work when we want them to.
that's fine. That's fine.
Hey, everybody. Welcome back to GPS Live for the week of July 29th. We are so excited that you're here. If you're watching this on demand afterwards, welcome to you too. As a reminder, the comments will still work. You can still throw comments in the chat, even if you're watching this later on, and we'll be able to see those. And if you're here live, we can interact with you directly through those comments. So if you've got something to say or some thoughts you want to get out there and we agree with it or think that it's relevant, then we will go ahead and highlight it and bring it up.
We want to hear from you.
We want to hear from you. So we're going to, because we have a different layout this week, we're going to go ahead and hide that date banner. We don't really need it. You guys know what the date is. But I'm Tristan Morris, and I'm joined today by our usual co-host, Jonathan Singer, but also special guest, returning guest, Drew Schmidt from the GuidePoint Research and Intelligence team. Drew's joining us to talk about some of the stories that we've got today. Drew, how are you doing today?
Good, man. Good, man. It's Friday, so I'm feeling good.
It's always good. That's one of the highlights of, I think, this stream in particular. It's like on a Friday, part of my work schedule is just sitting around talking to people for fun. So always enjoy that. But I think last time you were on, Drew, I don't think Grit fully launched.
It had just really officially launched.
Yeah. So why don't you, if you don't mind, want to give us a quick update on how things are going with Grit? Anything kind of that you guys have been working on recently that you might want to talk about?
Yeah, definitely. So we've been really getting kind of deep into a lot of the research side of what our team does. And what we've implemented fairly recently is our ransomware reports. So we do them on a monthly basis, but we also do a bigger, more in-depth report on a quarterly basis. And then we'll do a big one at the end of the year, which will be our big ransomware, our annual ransomware report. So we actually just released the Q2 of 2022 ransomware report. And it was some really cool research that we did.
Yeah.
Nice.
Awesome. That's sweet. And we're actually going to talk a little bit more about that a little later. And we want to reserve the bulk of today's time actually for talking to you about some ransomware based stuff and about the report. So why don't we really quickly kind of jump through the first couple stories that we've got. We'll give them about 5 to 10 minutes. And then we'll reserve the back kind of 2/3 or so for talking about some ransomware stuff. Sound good, everyone?
Yeah,
Let's
awesome.
do it.
All right, sweet.
What do we got first on the docket, Tristan?
First on the docket, we've got the fact that the United States has put a $10 million bounty on North Korean cyber criminal activity. This is actually kind of this is more of like an update. I think we've talked about some of the bounties that the U.S. put out before on different groups, and specifically on North Korea. But not that long ago, the U.S. government put out a $5 million bounty on North Korean-linked attacks on cryptocurrency exchanges and financial institutions.
Yeah.
Followed up really quickly by a $5 million reward for any information about disrupting anything like cryptocurrency theft or cyber espionage campaigns. But just this past week, they've launched a $10 million reward for anything related to attacks on U.S. critical infrastructure, which is a pretty big deal.
And like, this isn't necessarily the first and only time, and also not just targeting particular nation states, right? There's a lot of, adversaries out there that the United States has kind of ponied up, right, and pitched in. Especially this particular article coming from the Register does highlight that there is often, bounties on sectors that target stuff like critical infrastructure, right? To us, the power grid, the water, food supply, and things, and also, something that's extremely critical these days in this country, but also the federal elections, right? So those will also be areas of interest in who's coming in and how do we stop those people.
Yeah. So, Drew, from the Grit perspective, like from the kind of stuff that you work on, and you've been heavily involved in, even before Grit, doing ransomware research and looking at things like payouts for a long time. And this is a lot of this is heavily focused on North Korean activities around like cybercrime related to cryptocurrency theft and financial theft, and then now with the additional bounties being put out for infrastructure attacks and anything like that. I mean, from your perspective, what kind of impact does like a bounty like this usually have on this kind of activity?
I mean, I think it's a little bit difficult to say, the exact impacts, because I think even if there is going to be, activity done on behalf of this bounty, we likely won't hear too much about it. So it's kind of hard to estimate. But what I think is most important, and if I had to make a guess, is I think that something like this, especially coming out, as the Ukraine-Russia conflict is continuing on, just seeing the impacts from, the like self-organized Ukraine cyber army aspect and how impactful they've been against the Russian government, I think is probably one of the reasons that this is coming out, is leveraging the people that maybe they're not necessarily part of a direct government initiative, but they're still willing to kind of take some action against North Korea or something like that. I think that it's possible that it would have a lot of impact without a lot of the same security risks that you might get from or perceived security risks, I guess you could say, from just bringing on a whole bunch of different kinds of people. So I think that's kind of where this comes from, and it's definitely an interesting tactic to publicly announce some of this stuff. So it'll be interesting to see where it goes.
Awesome. And I just realized as we're getting into opinions that one of the things that we're supposed to do at the top of the show, and I forgot to do because I was so excited to get into the ransomware stuff, is make sure that everyone knows that the views and opinions expressed by the host of this live stream, normally Jonathan and myself, but also Drew in this case, are our own and do not necessarily reflect GuidePoint Security's views overall. I don't think we're going to say anything dangerous, but we always got to get it out there in case someone has a faux pas on something. So yeah, that's just an interesting, quick little story on the increasing bounties. If you want to know more about that, you can go to theregister.com, North Korea U.S. reward. That's the source that we used for this one. So Jonathan, what do we have next so we can kind of keep moving here and get to the good stuff?
Yeah, absolutely. So kind of coming up in the next direction, let's talk a little bit about a post-macro world, right? What does this mean? The idea that container files emerge as the malware delivery replacement. And so this, in fact, Drew and I were talking a little bit before the show about this, with the idea that it's not necessarily a new novel concept, but we have turned a new leaf, right? Office is no longer allowing macros by default. Now, obviously, there's some caveats in what the condition is around it, but the idea is if we're removing one attack vector for the bad guys, they're just going to turn in a different direction, right? Drew, you were mentioning to me that there's just a number of other ways that you can get a file execution of some sort on the system, and it doesn't have to be an Office document with a macro, right?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, if we really boil it down, the threat groups and threat actors are going to be taking the path of least resistance. And before, October, when Microsoft really came out and released the details of behind making this change, finally, that people have been asking for I feel like it's been forever. But, once that became or no longer became a vector that could be used, the attackers just moved on to the next easiest thing. And then in this case, we're seeing most of the major e-crime groups have now pivoted over to using specific ISO files that have some sort of file inside them. And most commonly, it's a shortcut file or an LNK file that is responsible for executing malicious PowerShell, or it's going to be responsible for using some other mechanism that is going to go and retrieve the next stage payload. So that's kind of what we're seeing most commonly right now. We're seeing that with IcedID. We're seeing that with other e-crime groups like Quackbot and others, and especially Emotet. So I mean, basically all of our major e-crime groups that we track on a regular basis are now adopting this new methodology.
Nice. Yeah, you definitely mentioned some names in there. Oh, sorry, Tristan.
Go ahead. Go ahead, John.
No, like you mentioned some really big names in that e-crime world, that are looking at what's going on in these, preventative nature areas and finding other ways, right? This also, the article coming from Dark Reading mentions an additional feature that's part of the NT file system, right, or NTFS, that is used to tag when a file comes from the internet. Specifically where a lot of this disabling of the macro ability by default comes from is the mark of the web. Is this something that is definitely helping from a defensive perspective?
So this is a lot of what contributes to determining where stuff comes from, and whether it comes external from the internet or not. And so as kind of a brief background, so files in an NTFS file system that are, so basically a Windows file system. They have what's called an alternate data stream, which for the most part is hidden from a normal user's perspective. But one of the things that they add to this alternate data stream when something comes from an external source or the internet is an indication that it did come from the internet. And so this is how things like disabling macros for files coming from the internet by default is going to come into play. They use these alternate data streams to determine that it actually came from the internet. And so I think it's definitely impactful, but at the same time, it's an actual fairly trivial process to remove that from a file as well.
Nice.
And just to wrap this one up, the kind of note that I would make is we got the story from darkreading.com, but some of the stuff that they call out in here is since the announcement on October 21st that Microsoft would be disabling macros by default, there was a 66% decline in threat actor usage of VBA and XL4 macros. And then in July of this year, so this month, the percentage of Office malware that cloud security platform detected was less than 10% of all malware activity, compared with 35% a year ago. So there's a pretty sharp decline in Office-based, malware.
That's
but what
fantastic.
Well, I mean, it's great, but that means that they're moving to these other platforms. What that means for us from like a security education perspective for our users is that for years we've been hammering home this like, don't open things that come to you from random emails, but that's largely been focused on this idea of like documents, right? These malicious documents that come in. At least a lot of the training that I went through and have to go through for like security based stuff, it always references documents. And now we're getting these other file types that your users aren't going to be as familiar with and may not be as cautious about opening. Because they may look at something that looks like it's from a spoofed IT account or something like that and say, oh yeah, this ISO file, sure, that I guess it's something I have to double click to install or whatever. So make sure that you're pivoting accordingly with the way that you're talking to your users about this kind of stuff. But with that, I want to leave the kind of last 15 minutes or so here to talk about Grit, to talk about ransomware, and specifically to talk about Drew's thoughts on this story that we found on the Hacker News about experts doing some research. Some research going in and finding similarities between the new Lockbit 3.0 that just released very recently and the Blackmail ransomware family. And the reason that we brought Drew on to talk about this is because of that quarterly ransomware report that was just released a couple weeks ago. Summing up everything that's happened over the last 3 months and the activity that they've noticed, and talked very heavily about the Lockbit 3.0 release. So, Drew, what can you tell us about Lockbit 3.0 and its significance and why it's so important to the ransomware kind of world right now?
Yeah. So Lockbit 3 is specifically the most recent release of the group called Lockbit's ransomware. So previously, before Lockbit 3 was officially released, there was a version called Lockbit 2, and then even before that, there was the original Lockbit ransomware. So when we're talking about Lockbit 3, it's just the newest iteration or the newest revamping of software. So you can think of it as just another software release, really. But Lockbit, since about the end of 2021 and really getting into all of 2022 so far, Lockbit has been hands down the most impactful ransomware group that we've seen, just based on even the public releasing of ransomware victims. I mean, they had several hundred victims over even just Q2 of 2022. So they've been very active. They've been very verbal in terms of how they're communicating about certain hot topic types of discussions, like even Ukraine, Russia, taking a very neutral stance on that, really just saying that they're focused on money and business. So from that perspective, staying away from some of the political stuff. But I think some of what's interesting about Lockbit in this most recent release of their 3.0 platform is how they've described some of their affiliate rules. And so one of the key things that stuck out in their affiliate rules, and if I just take a step back for a second, Lockbit is known as what's called a ransomware as a service type of organization. So they have other people from outside of the group that come in as affiliates and do work on behalf of the group, and then they basically split the profits.
So you're saying somebody else is going to, take this and do some damage. And they're kind of like the platform provider.
Exactly. So they provide the platform and the access to the ransomware, and then this affiliate does all the work. And Lockbit is then compensated 20% actually for providing access to the tools and ransomware, while the affiliate gets to keep 80% of whatever they negotiate for a ransom.
It's a pretty good split.
Yeah, exactly. So I think what's most interesting about these new affiliate rules that they put out, and they put out this really long list of things that they do, but the one that really stood out was it was pretty taboo for any ransomware group to go directly after any critical infrastructure, from any country really. And this kind of stems back to DarkSide and some of the different things that we're seeing with Revil. But basically, they've now taken a slightly different stance on how you can interact with critical infrastructure. And the big thing there was they say very explicitly, you cannot encrypt any files or systems that are associated with critical infrastructure, but you can still steal their data. So before, it was critical infrastructure completely off limits. Now it's you can't encrypt them, but you can actually still steal their data. So that's a really important distinction in how their targeting methodology has changed.
So literally people thought that they were in the clear if they were in one of these, state verticals. But now what you're saying is that, no, you're just going to become, we'll say like blackmailed basically for all your data getting leaked and furthermore, rather than your disruption of operations.
Right. Yep. So yeah, you might not have your files encrypted, but your the stealing of your data is still fair game at this point.
Gotcha. So one of the interesting things from the from working with you on the quarterly ransomware report, I think, was some of the breakdown of threat actors by number, right? Like what you guys observed. So just to kind of like cover a couple of those points, I know the transition from Lockbit 2 to Lockbit 3 actually had a bit of an impact on Lockbit's kind of overall operations and how frequently they were attacking there. So, from your kind of experience and the stuff that you've observed, do you see with Lockbit 3 now being out, do you think that Lockbit is going to even further outpace all of the others? Because it was like by factors of 10 or more, I think, right? That like Lockbit outpaced everyone on activity. Do you feel like that gap is going to widen, or?
It's a little bit hard to say. What I will say is anecdotally now, just looking at even our most recent tracker entries as they come in on a daily basis, Lockbit 3 just this week, or at least in the past 7 days, has already had 24 new leaked victims. So, wow. Again, coming out of the gates, really, really, really heavy in terms of operations that they're doing. And that's, quite a bit over or higher than most other groups that we're seeing. Where we might see a little bit of a change is how Conti, kind of went through this process where they sort of went away as a named group conducting operations, and they're supposedly kind of dissolving or merging with a lot of these other groups that have been out there, like Black Basta and Alpha, Hive, things of that nature. So it'll be interesting to see if some of those groups do actually kind of tick up their numbers as a result of some of the Conti operations kind of merging with those, or if Lockbit truly is just going to kind of take off.
It's funny you mentioned Conti, because that kind of plays off of, the $10 million bounty that we were just talking about a bit earlier in the segment, how that relates to just what we were seeing a couple months ago with the 10 million bounty for the Costa Rica ransomware attack, right? Where we've kind of stepped in and said that these malware groups need to be taken down, and we're going to throw incentives at it, right?
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
And also, there was a comment from an online viewer. Thank you, Andrew, by the way. But he wanted to make mention that these ransomware groups act as a full-blown business. And Drew, is that what you're seeing? Right? Did they check in? Did they go to the office? Do they have lunch breaks and PTO and water cooler chat?
I mean, I think that they definitely have a flexible PTO schedule, and they kind of take time when they want to. But I mean, quite truthfully, in terms of their functionalities, they definitely do have a lot of the same functions that you would see in another e-commerce type of business. They have contact us pages. They have real-time support for chat support for things like technology issues. They have, when they do issue a decryptor for files that have been encrypted after a ransom has been paid, they offer technical support from that perspective. They have full-blown e-commerce websites that they allow their affiliates to interact with that have chat queues and basically indicators of how long it's been since a reply has been provided, things of that nature. So, I mean, to Andrew's point, that's absolutely 100% correct. A lot of these groups are acting as full-blown businesses.
Well, I guess I'm going to be on the job hunt then. As soon as one of them offers a 401k match, I'll
and that's where our disclaimer kicks in.
That's where the disclaimer kicks in. But yeah, I think it's really interesting to look at this kind of through the lens of the article specifically that we were referencing that brought this story up, right, from the Hacker News. The fact that like the similarities between Lockbit 3 and Blackmail ransomware, but some of it seems, just from reading the article, it seems like maybe there's some kind of like just casual overlap. It's not necessarily like anything was lifted from one ransomware and used in another. But from your kind of experience and working with this stuff and researching it, what is the overlap really between like the different ransomware groups? When something like Lockbit 3 comes out, is this setting some kind of new standard that we expect to see other people adopting and changing their ransomware tactics and patterns too? Or are these going to stay standalone? Is that frowned upon? Just kind of like, for our viewers and for people who are trying to keep up with this stuff, should they be expecting that, like, if they go learn about Lockbit 3 and the way that it works, that they can apply that knowledge across the board to other ransomwares as they kind of continue to evolve?
Yeah, I mean, I think the way that I've looked at this for quite a while is, with rebranding processes of ransomware groups as they kind of get too much heat and they change their name and it's certain characteristics of their operations. And also just the fact of, we have certain groups that do disband, like Conti, like Revil, that, maybe they're a group of people and they are now going to participate in other groups. Right. With both of these types of scenarios, I think we're just going to continue to see a muddying of the waters, and it's just going to make it a little bit harder to determine, if an individual actor is going between different groups, or if he's kind of a freelancer, or any number of scenarios really that would allow for a specific part of a code base to end up in another ransomware variant. I think from what I read about the similarities, and specifically for the, what was referred to as a harvesting routine for identifying APIs, it was pretty similar. And I think it was even almost identical in terms of how Blackmail was doing their API resolution. So it's not unreasonable to think that, there was, somebody that maybe did some freelancing, or maybe somebody from the Blackmail group has now joined with Lockbit for a while, maybe even just temporarily, to help with that development of Lockbit 3. It's the same thing with how we're seeing, the password argument be used, and egregor was specifically called out in this article, but we do see it in the Black Cat ransomware as well, where you're either needing to supply a password for it to actually work, which is very effective in terms of being able to allow somebody like me who does reverse engineering to do an in-depth analysis of that binary. So I think overall we're seeing the start of a trend of the continuing muddying of waters, and I think that is great that Trend Micro released this research, because I think it's going to be very important for Grit and other organizations like Grit to continually collaborate and share this information so that we can actually continue to keep up, or try to keep up.
Yeah. Well, I want to save the last couple minutes here. We got about 5 minutes left in the normal stream time, so I want to save a couple minutes here just for you to take an opportunity to talk about the quarterly ransomware report and some of the other stuff that you found, the methodology that goes into that, and what the monthly versus quarterly versus annual reports are going to look like. We obviously haven't done an annual one yet, but we're coming in now to starting up Q3, and that'll be our second quarterly report at the end of the quarter. So I just wanted to kind of give you some time and some space to talk about what you guys do to compile those reports, what makes them unique for your perspective, and what kind of knowledge and experience you guys are bringing to the table, so that people know what to expect when they're looking at those reports.
Yeah, definitely. So, quite a few months ago, the team was just kind of sitting around saying, hey, we really, love that we're doing a lot of this research, but, we want to make sure that we're sharing this on a regular basis with the industry and providing our perspective and the things that we're seeing. And so that's kind of where this idea was born was, hey, we really want to share this information. We want to share what we're doing on an internal basis because we think it's really cool. And so we really decided to release a couple of different kinds of reports. And as you mentioned, the first one is our monthly report. And this is meant to be just a really quick and dirty, straightforward trend for the month that really just shows anything new that's coming out, specifically for emerging groups, things of that nature. But again, it's meant to just be a real quick pulse. It's not meant to take you a long time to get through it, but it's meant to just be informative. Moving on into more of the quarterly and even annual reports, these are where we want to take an opportunity to get into the deeper analysis that we do on a regular basis to say, hey, here are the trends that we're seeing. These are longer term trends. We compare them to the previous year and the previous quarters, as well as just looking in, to how it fits, year to date. And again, it's more about the trends and really looking at, estimating, what we expect to see moving forward and how organizations can really use that intelligence to their advantage and really help them educate their boards as to why they need, increased budget or personnel, but as well as just, again, keeping a pulse on what's going on. Because I think if we've noticed anything over the last couple of quarters and even since the beginning of the year, we have 5+ ransomware groups that have emerged, and I think it's closer to even over 10. We have over 500 ransomware victims that have been named to public sites, and so ransomware is a very real problem. A lot of people focus on big events like the Ukraine-Russia conflict or things like that, critical vulnerabilities. And those are all important too. But as we focus more attention on those, we sometimes forget that ransomware is there, or it becomes less of a priority when in reality, this threat is continuing to grow and it's year over year getting, more and more impactful for organizations. So that's kind of our goal there, is to keep everybody informed and keep them up to date with the trends that we're seeing so that they can use that to their advantage.
Awesome.
If our viewers online wanted to, read these grit reports or receive them on their, regular publication basis, how would they go about that?
Yes, I think the best place to get those is from guidepointsecurity.com in the blog section. Tristan, that's the best place?
Yeah, for the monthly ones, those are probably going to be primarily focused on the blogs, but you'll also be able to find when we do the quarterly reports, we will kind of like drop a summary blog there with a link to it. But if you're looking for the full reports themselves and you just want to go straight to those will be available under the resources tab. You can go to the resource library and find those by filtering through for I think it's for the threat intelligence reports section.
Yeah, and I think we also post all the links and everything via Twitter and LinkedIn when we're releasing those. So yep. If you follow on LinkedIn or Twitter, you'll get those as well.
Yeah, absolutely you will. Well, Drew, thank you so much for taking the time to join us today and talk through some of those stories and also talk to us about Grit and the reports that you guys are putting out and take a deep dive on Lockbit 3 and the activity that activity and research that's coming out about that since it is such a new platform. So thank you so much for joining us. Also to all of our viewers, and especially if you're watching this on demand, we really appreciate having you guys here. Again, feel free to comment after the fact. We'll go back and read those. Drew, is there anything that you want to highlight or sign off with?
No, I just hope everybody has a good weekend.
Have a good weekend, and
awesome.
Be on the lookout for the next monthly report. It's going to be coming up here real soon. Drew and I are probably going to start working on that right after this, actually. And thank you so much for joining us. Again, those stories that we highlighted today were from the Register for the $10 million bounty on North Korea, dark reading for the PostMacro world when it comes to how attacks are being delivered, and then the Hacker News for the similarities between Lockbit 3 and Blackmail ransomware. So for GuidePoint Security, I've been Tristan Morris.
I'm Jonathan Singer.
And I'm Drew.
We hope. And Andrew started to a rhythm there, and I was like,
there it is.
We're professionals. We know what we're doing. So thanks so much for joining us. We will see you again next week.